for that 40 ppm threshold.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next talk, From Field to Groundwater, Quantifying Crop Nitrogen Budgets, Performance Metrics, and Nitrate Leaching in Southern Willamette Valley, Oregon.
Today I'll be speaking about my research project looking at nitrogen budgets, performance metrics, and nitrate leaching in the Southern Willamette Valley from field to groundwater. I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, a team of folks from EPA and CSS Incorporated and OSU Extension. Our main highlight from this project, which is a 15-year study of, which is a 4-year study of 14 different production and agricultural fields in the Willamette Valley, is that nitrate leaching is concentrated in the fall, mainly in the fall, and to some extent in the winter, and this is a real challenge for nutrient management, for management of the water that's moving into groundwater. This is data from the Oregon's groundwater management areas, or GWAMAs. This is about 30,000 sites where people, when they sell a house, they have to take the they have to measure nitrate, arsenic, and coliforms and send that data to Oregon Health Authority. So we have a good index of water quality in all of these domestic wells, which are not really regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act. And this shows you a lot of the hot spots. The red is where it's over the drinking water standard, when the sample was over the drinking water standard. And this shows you our groundwater management areas in the lower Umatilla Basin, the northern Malheur County. There's other hot spots, but the other one that's been identified is the Southern Willamette Valley GWAMA, and I'll be speaking mainly about the Southern Willamette GWAMA today. This project is titled Partnership for Improved Nutrient Efficiency, working with farmers, growers, managers, conservation groups in the area to help quantify the water quality benefits of their actions and to inform decisions. We would like to connect this data to the USDA nutrient tracking tool and to other decisions locally. So this project is comparing data from 2014 to 2017, which is the current study, with information from 1994 to 1997 that was collected by a group at OSU. And since that time, we've had a number of things happen within the basin. We've had within the area, we've had the formation of the GWAMA, we've had changes, improvements in irrigation practices, improvements in breeding and production, and improvements to fertilizer management, including recommendations for the right source, right rate, right time, and right place for these fertilizers. And so the idea is that we are currently adding less nitrogen than we used to. We're seeing more of it going into crop harvest, and we are seeing less going into the groundwater. That is our hypothesis. So we studied 13 production farm fields and 1 fallow field at Finley Wildlife Refuge. These were managed by the farmer, and we didn't tell them what to do. They did their normal practices, and so we're really trying to capture true production farming practices in the area. There's a range of soils. There's a range of crop rotations. Some things like blueberry or hazelnuts were continuous. Others are shifting from one crop to another. And so there's this time when there's a fallow period, for example. And so what does that mean for nutrients, for nutrient loss and crop nutrient balances within that system? So this is our field design for years and 14 total sites that we examined. In each field we had a pre-NART lysimeter. Some of the fields we actually had the historical passive capillary samplers that were used by the OSU group. Only 5 of the fields we had this. So this is all 14 sites. We had these pre-NARTs. We analyzed them for nitrate and for volume. So this applies a slight vacuum, and then that is analyzed for nitrate and volume. We also had information from the farms about crop yield, irrigation timing, what the nitrate concentrations in irrigation water in some cases, and the fertilizer type and timing. And then we used a water balance to estimate the drainage and then the nitrate leaching from each field. And this study is focusing on the pre-NERT data, so it's comparable across all 14 sites. So I'll talk about the results. This is one of the peppermint fields, irrigated peppermint fields. So this shows you the lysimeter nitrate concentrations over time. The blue is blueberry. The purple color is mint, and you can see that there was the first year of this mint field, we had very high nitrate concentrations. These are ranging from 20 to almost 90 milligrams per liter on average, volume weighted average for this mint field. And actually the farmer looked at the root development in this mint crop and decided to replant. And so you see that field has much lower concentrations in the later years because of this replacement, what would be considered, somewhat of a poorly performing crop, and then the reduced nitrate leaching when the crop had better rooting. So you can see here that we see that there are high concentrations sometimes in blueberry and mint. We also see high concentrations in some of the grass seed crops, although not all of them. Some of them have very low rates. So it really varied between field. The vegetable seed and the fallow fields tended to have lower nitrate concentrations overall. The vegetable seed in orange and the fallow in brown. We had one field that was vegetable and then converted to fallow, and you can see the nitrogen concentrations really dropping off in that field. We also use the precipitation and a drainage model to estimate nitrate leaching in kilograms per hectare over the time period, and you'll see that the leaching is very well tied to rainfall. So when you have an increase in the fall rains, we see an increase in leaching in many of our systems. Very little irrigation. So irrigation doesn't seem to have much of an effect on leaching because we don't irrigate to the point where it should move off site, right? So we don't see nitrate leaching associated in the summers associated with irrigation, but we do see fairly high leaching from the peppermint and some of the grass seed, and fairly low leaching in the vegetable seed and in the fallow crops. This bar graph shows for each year and for each field the nitrate leaching by season or by quarter. And so the red is fall. You see that a lot of the leaching occurs during the fall, and that the orchard and the mint had the highest rates of leaching overall. This is that poorly performing mint crop, but we also see some fairly high year leaching rates for total annual leaching over 250 in blueberry 1 year. Vegetable seed and fallow has fairly low leaching, generally below 100, and the completely fallow field has almost, you can barely measure the leaching. It's very low. The grass seed has variable leaching depending on where you are, but you do see some fields have a fair amount of leaching over 150 or 100 kilograms per hectare per year, which is similar in terms of the magnitude as pounds per acre. It's about 10% difference. But you see that the orchard and the mint and the grass seed, most of the losses are in the fall in red and the winter in blue. We also looked at the relationship between nitrogen inputs. This is a little complicated, so I'll try to walk through it. We looked at the relationship between nitrogen inputs and crop nitrogen removal on the y-axis. And so this gives you a sense of the how much nitrogen is removed from the site from crop removal and how that influences the potential surplus. So we drew a line here for the surplus greater than 100. So anything on this side is greater than 100 surplus. And so you can see in particular the blueberry, there's not a lot of nitrogen in blueberries. And so when you harvest the blueberries, there's just not a lot of crop removal. So you see that it has a high requirement for nitrogen, but there's not a lot of removal. And so that nitrogen stays behind in the soil. The grass seed is all kind of in the intermediate area. The mint sites have high inputs, but they also have high plant uptake and removal. There's a lot of nitrogen taken off-site in the peppermint and in the oil from the peppermint. It's very high nitrogen, and so we see that there's not a lot of surplus. So what we're looking at maybe is this surplus is a good metric, that we don't want to have surpluses over a certain level. And so that would be one of the questions, is how does the surplus relate to the leaching? And so the blueberries, and this is the mint crop that had that poorly performing year, and a couple of this is wheat and grass seed and vegetables. Some of these also had high surplus, lower inputs, but still a high surplus. This was a field that was a crop failure. It wasn't harvested, and so there was no removal, but there was quite a bit of nitrogen added. And so we see that there's a lot of nitrogen left behind in the soil. In comparing our data with the historic information, there was a lot of work done on peppermint and a fair bit of work done on vegetables in this previous study. And you see that the mean of our study is kind of on the high end for peppermint compared to historic data. So we're not doing a lot better. We're doing about the same for peppermint than we were in the past. Vegetable crop, these historic vegetables were vegetables grown for forage, which are managed a little bit differently and may be more nutrient intensive than the vegetables grown for seed. So we see that we're kind of on the lower end for the vegetable seed, so that does represent an improvement in terms of reducing nitrate leaching from the vegetable crops. So in terms of the take-home message for this study, we saw that many crops have some nitrogen leaching. There's a lot of variability between crops, between fields, and also between years. We saw high leaching losses with blueberry and some of the mint crops, in particular the mint crop that didn't have good root development. They had high nitrate leaching losses. Grass seed fields were kind of intermediate in the leaching and in the surplus. There's definitely opportunity to improve grass seed nitrogen management and reduce some of the leaching there. We saw that most of the leaching happens in the fall, with second highest season being winter, but we do have these high leaching losses when the fall rains start. And poorly performing crops or crop failures can have very high leaching and surplus. So in terms of the messages for the community to inform decisions, what we're seeing is that nitrate leaching losses are concentrated in time during the fall and to a lesser extent the winter, and this is a real challenge for nutrient management. This is not during the growing season. This is after the end of the growing season when you have nitrogen left in the soil, and that mobilizes and is leached. And so we really want to try to minimize the surplus and remaining in the soil. We have the next analysis that we will do in this study is taking our end of season soil testing and comparing it to leaching rates. And so we're thinking that the surplus N that's left behind in the soil should be minimized. We also think perhaps that fall fertilizer should be judiciously applied, that there is a small amount of fertilizer that's applied in the fall, in particular for the grass seed crops, and we should probably look at that very closely and make sure that we're not losing that nitrogen that there's a benefit in terms of crop production, and then we're not losing all of that nitrogen into the nitrate leaching into groundwater. We knew that crop failures and poor performers have high leaching rates, and so it's very important to pay attention to that. And then we also suggest that cover crops or relay crops could help. Other research has shown this. Very few to none of our systems had cover crops. Cover crops were not a big feature in most of our fields that we studied. They weren't being used, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think it can be complex, and it can be challenging to manage for cover crops in some cases. And so I think, though, that we really should be looking more at cover crops and how to, as a strategy for reducing that fall and winter leaching. And with that, I'd like to thank all the listeners and especially thank the partners and collaborators on this project from EPA Region 10, Alan Henning, Audrey Eldridge with Oregon DEQ in particular, and folks at Benton Soil and Water Conservation District and the Upper Willamette Soil and Water Conservation District who helped us identify farmers to work with, the OSU Extension staff who talked to us about farm practices and made connections with farmers and growers, and really, again, to emphasize the importance of the growers and farmers who allowed us to work on their property and to work collaboratively with them in understanding their fields and sharing data with us. So thank you very much, and please ask me any questions. Today I'll be speaking about my
Thanks, Jenna. Any questions? Please put them in the chat box.
Yeah, I'm on the line if anybody has any questions. So Kyrie is asking, most soil leaching occurs in the fall and winter. Can you hear me, Doug?
Yes.
Okay. Most soil leaching is occurring in the fall and winter. Under what circumstances are you seeing summertime leaching? We do see in a couple of the fields where there is irrigation in the summer that we'll see some leaching during that time. Right now we're studying at the Oregon State University Vegetable Farm. We're studying a cornfield, and we're looking at the leaching from 2.5 to 10 feet from that cornfield. And we've got kind of a paired design where we have cover crops and without a relay crop and a no relay crop. And we're seeing some leaching, a small amount of leaching in the summer, but it's really, you know, the way people time the irrigation, they are hoping to not see, you know, we're hoping to keep all that water on the site and not lose water. And so we're generally not seeing much summer leaching at all in these cases. Let's see, Mike Isensee asks, did these fields in the study only use commercial fertilizers? And do any of the farmers do any nutrient management soil testing to direct their fertility program? So the fields, most of the fields are using commercial synthetic fertilizers. The blueberry is one exception where they are using organic fertilizers, and they actually recently switched to organic within the first year or two of a year or two before the project, before we started measuring the nitrate leaching. And some of the high leaching in the blueberry we think is because of a little bit of incomplete information about how much nitrogen was in some of the materials that they were applying. That's kind of the idea that we're getting from the work, but there was a lot of fertilizer and a lot of organic fertilizer, nitrogen ended up being applied to these fields. And so that's one other take-home message. I didn't dwell on it here, but that better understanding the sources of nitrogen and the behavior of these organic nitrogen sources is really key to minimizing leaching. And then Jay asks, is the leaching consistent across soil types, or does soil type play into the level? It's going to be hard for us to untangle that because we have many different soil types and we have many different crop types and management practices. But our hope is right now, actually, we're looking at the soils data that we gathered. We collected a couple of years of soil quality information in conjunction with Teresa Madison at the Benton Soil and Water Conservation District.